Hello and welcome to episode 1. I'm really excited to start filming a little series on conspiracy theories and the supernatural. I've decided to call it Samspiracy, and episode 1 is going to be about the JFK assassination. I've decided to break it into a few parts because I know some of you have busy days and listening to me talk about JFK for an hour may not be within your schedule. So we'll break this into shorter bits. First, I'm going to talk about the assassination itself. So, as I'm sure most of you out there know, JFK was assassinated. As to the details of who was involved and for what reason, I bet most of you disagree or don't know. I did a ton of research in the National Archives and looked into a few other sources, and I'd like to talk about what I found. The main source I used, from which I use direct quotes, is the final report of the Assassination Records Review Board from September of 1998. On November 22nd, 1963, around 12:30 p.m., President John F. Kennedy was shot in a motorcade through Dealey Plaza in downtown Dallas, Texas. Around 1 p.m., he was pronounced dead at Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas. That is about all I could find that isn't really arguable, and even that some people will argue. Some people think he's still alive today, or was alive still for a while. If he was alive today, he'd be 106, which, I mean, hey, some people do live that long. Good for him if he is. I personally don't think so. But yeah, that is one of the only facts that's not super disputable about the event in question. Later, the day of the assassination, Dallas police arrested a man named Lee Harvey Oswald as a suspect for the murder of JFK. And the shooting of a Dallas patrolman sometime after the assassination. Not a whole lot of details on that, but maybe I'll circle back later. Before he could reach trial, he was shot by a man named Jack Ruby when he was being transferred from the city jail to the county jail. So in addition, this is really fascinating to me, and this is going to come into play a little bit later. We'll talk about it. In addition to the assassination investigations that were already going to happen by the Dallas police and the FBI, the CIA, probably the NSA, whoever else, quite a few organizations. Oh, the Secret Service. President Lyndon B. Johnson, who is now president after the assassination because he was vice president at the time, he immediately established a commission to investigate led by Chief Justice Earl Warren. After 10 months, the Warren Commission report concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone and shot the president from a sniper's nest on the 6th floor of his workplace, the Texas School Book Depository. However, it concluded some of its investigations in secret and sealed many of its records. They also didn't review the photos and x-rays from the autopsy because it would make a morbid thing for all time. So the public had doubts about their findings. Who wouldn't? So subsequently, other federal agencies were established or that already existed, conducted partial or complete reinvestigations of the assassination. So many times over the years, which we'll get into it. It's crazy. So in 1967, New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison's indictment and trial of Clay Shaw for conspiracy to murder the president provided new credential? I'm not sure. I shorthanded and I don't know what it said. And momentum to Warren Commission critics. This trial was the first public showing of Abraham Zapruder, famous Zapruder film, Abraham Zapruder's film footage of the assassination, the footage available to the public today. Although not the original, which was lost, and we'll get into that later. When President Gerald Ford established the Rockefeller Commission, he started a trend to examine U.S. government intel actions during the early 60s and 70s. As a part of its forensic review of the assassination, they reviewed the Zapruder film in February of 1975. Holy crap. So it happened in 1963, and now the Zapruder film is really being involved in the investigation in 1975. A whole, what is that, 12 years later? About 12 years later. That's crazy. Almost 12 years, I guess, because it was February. Shortly thereafter, the television program Goodnight America showed the film, and many of the American public concluded that he was shot from the front after seeing it. I'm assuming this is because most of the American public don't know, or at least at the time, didn't know that an animal or a human or an object gets shot. Usually the, what's the word I'm looking here? Entrance, yes, sure, we'll go with that. The entrance hole is always going to be, usually, I shouldn't say always, but it's typically going to be a lot smaller than the exit wound or hole or point. That's usually a lot larger, and you'll see, depending on what was shot, like a beveling as it everything kind of explodes and moves out this way and forces everything out. So I'm assuming, because you could see from the Zapruder film something happening here, the American public was like, oh, he was shot from the front, because his head was kind of slightly down and this way, and you see something here. So typically you'll see the most splatter from the exit wound. So at the same time, the church committee uncovered assassination plots against foreign leaders such as Fidel Castro between 1960 and 1963. Some involved organized crime figures, foreshadowing. The committee found the intel agencies, primarily the CIA and the FBI, deficient in their investigations of JFK's death, and critics called for a reinvestigation. Again. So, by September of 1976, millions of Americans were dubious. Authors, lecturers, and assassination researchers noted that the government hadn't released germane records and even lied to itself about the case. So the HSCA does its reinvestigation. So it's 1776, 13 years after the assassination. Their report stated it believed that the president's death was the result of a conspiracy, but they couldn't conclusively identify any single person or persons or groups as being involved for certain. Other than Lee Harvey Oswald. And get this, the HSCA criticized the performance of the Warren Commission and investigative agencies like the FBI and CIA for their initial assassination investigations, but concluded Lee Harvey Oswald had killed JFK and the single bullet theory was sound. I'll say again, they were like, yeah, FBI and CIA, they didn't do due justice. They did a terrible investigation, but yeah, it was Lee Harvey Oswald. And you know what else? One bullet, one pristine bullet, somehow went through the president's neck, came out his throat, went through his head, came out his head, and then struck the governor in front of him and went through his back, came out his chest, creating a sucking chest wound, and went through, I'm not sure if it went in or out the wrist and hand, and then his thigh. Yep. That sound. I mean, everything else was a joke. It was totally conspiracy, but it was, one shit. And it was, I don't know what to tell you, man. It was crazy. It was like a homicidal bee just circling around, just pew, 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 poking all these holes in people. It's crazy. But yeah, that's what happened. I think that's probably my favorite thing about, if there's a favorite thing to be had about something so devastating as a person's public death, it's that government agencies actually, I don't know if they released that to the public or if that was a part of I feel like they did. And they were like, yeah, so we expect the public to believe that one bullet did all that damage. But don't research anything, don't look into it. We're not going to talk about how many bullet holes there were in these people. It was one bullet, just leave it at that. So anyway, despite all that, the HSCA did validate some of the criticisms of the Warren Commission by concluding that there was a high probability that two gunmen fired at President Kennedy. But under House rules, the HSCA's unpublished records were sealed for 50 years. It was supposed to be sealed for 50 years, which would have come out in 2029. So, internal squabbling occurred, and ex-staffers claimed the report didn't reflect their investigative work and info, that didn't confirm what the committee leadership, the leadership's preconceived notions. If it didn't confirm that, they ignored it, they tossed it aside, they didn't include it in their final report and their findings. 4 years after the HSCA issued its report, a former member introduced legislation to open those records, and they just never voted on it. So they remained sealed until Congress passed the JFK Act in 1992, which we'll get to. Oliver Stone released the film JFK. Maybe you've seen it, maybe not. I'm curious to see it after this. He released that film on December 20th, 1991. It actually includes such actors that you may have heard of as Kevin Costner. The trailer that I watched of it, it looked like Sissy Spacek is in it. She was also in Carrie, if any of you have seen that, the original Carrie. Kevin Bacon, blah. And just some big names in it. So I'm curious to see it. I don't know if it's any good, so I'm not going to recommend it just yet. But I'll let you know what I think in a later video if I do watch it. So this film came out, and Congress began to introduce bills and resolutions in January of 1992 to mandate the release of assassination records, which the review board credited largely to that film. So basically, according to this review board, Congress was like, okay, the American public doesn't trust us, they don't believe in us, and our agencies, we need to do something about this. So we're going to establish a review board, and it's going to be made up of civilians that are not associated with the federal government. So, like, nobody is or has been employed by the federal government, and they're going to investigate, and they're going to have the power to force federal agencies such as the FBI, the CIA, NSA, Secret Service to release any records they have of the assassination. And it has to be made public. And the only person who can overturn that decision once they decide this needs to be made public is the President of the United States. And so that's what they do. In 1992, Congress establishes the Assassination Records Review Board. Okay, so the act required, the JFK Act, where they established this review board, required the members of the review board to be impartial private citizens, which, like I said, couldn't have worked for the federal government, etc., or like state or local government. Then he calls twice to Temple Sherith, Israel, to confirm when services are going to be held. And then he phoned Larry Crawford, his live-in handyman at the Carousel Club, to ask whether he'd received any messages and to go through all relating records of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. The act further instructed the president to nominate distinguished persons of high national reputation in their respective fields who are capable of exercising independent and objective judgment. So the board itself was to be 5 people, which would include a historian and a member of the Bar Association, aka an attorney. And I think there was a third, which we'll come back to that. So to summarize, this review board, which would employ additional people for reviewing these millions of records that they would eventually make available to the public, had the power to tell the FBI, the NSA, the Secret Service, CIA to release all these records pertaining to the assassination, and they had to comply. The only person who could veto them, as I mentioned, was the president. And the only reason anything would be held back from the public is, like, let's say we have operatives that it would endanger, or it would reasonably endanger national security to release these records. That's the only reason that they'd be withheld or maybe even released, but redacted. The JFK Act had 3 provisions. So the review board is an independent agency consisted of 5 citizens trained in history, archives, and the law who were not government employees but had the authority to order agencies to declassify documents. For the first time in history, this is an outside group that had the power to do this. Once the board made the decision that a document should be declassified, only the president could overrule, as I mentioned. And just a little, something I found interesting is that the final published report of the review board says the FBI and CIA were pretty cooperative, but the DOJ was resistant on behalf of the White House. Just a little something that I found interesting, especially considering kind of my own little theories or thoughts that I was developing as I was going through everything. Getting the review board set up and active was delayed 18 months due to the transition between the Bush and Clinton administrations. After locating files designated by the agencies, most of the review board's additional requests for records went to the CIA and FBI, but there were also requests to the Secret Service, Department of State, Department of Defense, NSA, and the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. They were reviewing documents not previously reviewed in prior investigations. They also encouraged private citizens and organizations to donate any records they might have in order to make the JFK collection valuable to historians. These donations included the desk diaries of former President and former Warren Commission member Gerald Ford, the personal files of Jim Garrison, the New Orleans prosecuting attorney, notes taken during interviews with Lee Harvey Oswald by both Dallas police captain and former FBI agent, films from individuals in Dallas, and President Kennedy's aide, Dave Powers. Mind you, this is all happening in 1993, so 30 years after the assassination, this review board is established and they're receiving donations from people of evidence or any related records. So donations also included papers from the son of Doc J. Lee Rankin, General Counsel of the Warren Commission, and the diary of Clay Shaw, the only person tried for the murder of JFK, or in connection with the murder, who was later acquitted and died before a new trial. The review board sought records from Russia, Belarus, Cuba, and Mexico. Many leads were pursued, but ultimately only a few records were obtained. It states, although this is a genuine loss to the historical completeness of the assassination records, work continues on the attempts of, and the board is hopeful that eventually these records, particularly the voluminous KGB surveillance records on Oswald, will be added to the collection. Yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath. 2 conferences with experts in their field, and interaction with the public helped because they would get suggestions for further research. And it also, it really fostered like a sense of trust with the public, because they had a lot of their stuff held in private, where they went through things, as they were kind of getting going, figuring out how to decide what's relevant and what's not. But then ultimately they had a bunch of public interactions too, and including interviews, and then these public hearings where they would interact and answer questions and let the people know where they were at on these investigations, essentially. And so, this was a whole new thing. Instead of us not trusting the government, we have this civilian-run review board that we're interacting with. We can make suggestions, we can give them stuff, we can ask them questions, and they're answering us honestly and letting us know, like, hey, here's what we found so far, or eventually you'll see what we found so far because it'll be published in the National Archives. So agencies even had to sign these written declarations under penalty of perjury to ensure compliance with the JFK Act. It listed the scope and quality and timeliness of its search, each agency's search, and what records were submitted to the board. Staff also decided to depose and indict officials of agencies with poor records systems and those that failed to comply. with the spirit of the act. There are more than 4 million records on JFK in the National Archives as of September of 1998, when their official findings report was published. All right. So now on to the assassination itself, that fateful day. The motorcade proceeded from Main Street at the extreme west end, turned right onto Houston Street, and proceeded north 1 block in order to make a left turn onto Elm Street. Shortly after the turn, a shot can be heard by all, and the president grabbed his throat. Mrs. Kennedy notices and pulls him toward her, trying to see what's wrong, at which point his head is pointed slightly down and to the left. Now, I would put the video over me so you can see it, but I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do that. However, because of this act, these records have been made available to the public. It's considered like public property. So if you search the JFK Act, it's the title for the main one that's just going to be the clean video. I think it's like in French, if I remember correctly, but you'll say like Assassinat de Kennedy. This is going to be the most accurate footage that we have, because unfortunately it's not the original footage, and even Zapruder did not get his original footage back. But if you're dark like me and you really want to find answers, I recommend watching the footage and doing like I did, where I went through everything I'm about to tell you and watched the video and then went back and read through to confirm sort of the recreations by people, in interviews and on trial, saying this is what happened in this order. It's pretty dark. I mean, it's a grainy video. It's old, it's somebody's home recording camcorder from 1963. So it's pretty grainy, but you can clearly see what I personally feel is the exit wound right here. And it's hard to watch. It's to think about poor Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy sitting there next to her husband, the man she chose to spend the rest of her life with, that she loved, to see blood and brains and skull just go flying out of his face like that. I mean, that's so terrifying. It's horrible. So prepare yourself if you're going to watch it. I do recommend watching it. I'm not going to provide a link here, but you can find it on YouTube. And I recommend you do if you are really curious. Otherwise, you can hear me talk about it. So, they were on Houston Street, and then they were to make a left on Elm Street. I will put that up. You'll see it in a second. Shortly after the turn, a shot could be heard by all. The president grabbed his throat. Ms. Kennedy notices, pulls him to her, trying to see what's going on, at which point his head is pointed slightly down and to the left towards her, because he's going like that. He's grabbing his throat, and she grabs his arm and kind of pulls him this way. And so he's like this, and he's shot again. At which point, you can clearly see what looks like an exit wound coming from around this region here. So the drivers then sped away and took the president and Governor Connolly to the nearby hospital, which, if you're interested, you can go through. Granted, the Warren Commission's findings and interviews are where you're going to find a lot of the recreations of exactly who saw what on this day, coming from the Secret Service and the other people in the convoy or motorcade, which, if you don't trust the Warren Commission's findings, I don't know. But that is going to be the most complete reconstruction of what happened in that moment. And it does match very closely or perfectly with what you will see in the video footage. So going on mainly that, I'm going to continue on with what I found from that as matching anything else that I could find so far. Interview and testimony of the Secret Service, Ms. Kennedy, the vice president, and other others present in the motorcade, as well as witnesses, pieced together the following. The driver of the vehicle behind the president's convertible was told by the passenger to get up closer right after he noted 12:30 on the clock tower, which would be either on or near the location of that book depository where he was shot by Oswald from the 6th floor. So everybody says 12:30. This is all confirmed later. So right after he noted 12:30 on the clock tower, the type, that they were supposed to be at the Trade Mart, because that's where they were supposed to continue on from there, where the president was going to give a speech. So forgive me, this is my notes. It's a lot to print out if you're going to actually go through the archives. And feel free to direct message me if you have any additional information or corrections or questions. I will include my email at the end. 12:30 on the clock tower, the time they were supposed to be at the Trade Mart. There were the chiefs and captains of the local PD and sheriff's departments also present. And I believe the first car, from what I recall, a few of them stated that they had noted the time as 12:30 as well. It was about 12:30 when the first bullet was fired, when the first boom happened. The Secret Service on the rails behind and in front of the president's vehicle were supposed to hop off and run up close to the convertible whenever travel speed slowed enough, and to keep the crowd at a safe distance away. The secret agent behind the car who ran up, Mr. Hill, would be credited as likely saving Mrs. Kennedy's life when the headshot was fired and she panicked and dove over the trunk. So if you do tend to watch the video, or maybe you don't, I'll explain to you. So what you can see from the Zapruder film, they're filming, it's moving along, and they kind of jump at one point, which I'm assuming is when he was shot in the throat. And then as the view clears, because there's some signs in the way right as that first shot happens, and then it clears, and you have a clear view of the convertible with Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy and Mr. and Mrs. Connolly, and then the driver. And you see him grabbing his throat. You see her pulling him this way, and then you see, and at which point, when that happens, Mrs. Kennedy, she panics, she jumps back, she dives over the back of the car, towards the Secret Service. But that Secret Service agent, I forget his first name, but it was Mr. Hill. He shoved her back in the car, knowing she's probably gonna fall out of the car and get hurt if I don't put her back in the car. Which likely would have happened, because at this point, everyone establishes shots fired, we need to get out of here, and they gun it, and they get the heck out of there, and they're like, oh, he's been hit, we need to go to the hospital. And when they gun it and peel off out of there, I'm exaggerating probably, but they got the heck out of there, and she probably would have fallen out of the car. So he might have saved her life by forcing her back into the vehicle with her dead husband. Oh my gosh. Where both wives pulled their husbands into their laps. I mean, this is, oh my gosh. It's so sad. Getting off that tangent. So he would be credited with probably saving her life. Because she drove across and was reaching out to them, and they threw her back in, or he threw her back in. So after he got her back in the car, just in the nick of time, essentially, the drivers, they left, and a couple of the vehicles, they drove quite quickly and made their way to Parkland Memorial Hospital. And that's where we're going to leave off for this video. So video 2 is going to continue on from the point that they arrive at the hospital, the doctor's working on him, trying to save his life, his transportation out of the state, and the autopsy. And then video 3, which is my personal favorite, where I get really excited talking about it, is about Jack Ruby and his insane few days and insane life. So if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to hit that like button. And if you want to see more as I keep releasing these videos on this story and any future stories, or conspiracy theories, or supernatural happenings, then yeah, please subscribe. Also, I did mention that I would put out my email address for this. So if you have any questions, something that I maybe was too vague on and didn't answer, or a suggestion or correction, please feel free to message me. at samspiracysupernatural@gmail.com. That's SAMSPIRACY supernatural, all one word, at gmail.com. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Please stay tuned and check out my next video, which talks about all the aftermath.